Okay, again, welcome. Today's program on Harvey Milk will be presented by Kathleen Sitzer. She was the founding artistic director of the New Jewish Theater St. Louis for 22 years until her retirement in 2018. As a professional actor, she has been seen on many St. Louis stages. Currently, Kathleen is a docent at the Opera Theater St. Louis and the St. Louis Kathleen Feldman Holocaust Museum, and she's currently involved in a number of theater projects. So we're very fortunate to have Kathleen here today, and I'm going to turn over the program to her. And welcome, and thank you very much, Kathleen.
Thanks, Laura. It is a pleasure to be here with you and with all of the members of the Mirowitz Center who have signed up for this presentation. As Laura indicated, my name is Kathleen Sitzer, and I am a docent with Opera Theater of St. Louis, which is why I'm here with you today. And it's to preview one of the 4 operas of the current Opera Theater season, Harvey Milk by composer Stuart Wallace. A little bit first, I'd like to explain to you about Opera Theater. Some of you may not be that familiar with it. Since its founding in 1976, Opera Theater has presented top-notch performances from the classical repertoire, along with more than 40 world and/or American premieres. As an example, the 2019 commission of Fire Shut Up in My Bones by jazz artist Terence Blanchard went on to be the history-making opening production of the current season for the New York Metropolitan Opera. And what do I mean by history-making? Well, this opera is the first opera by a Black composer that the Met has ever presented. Imagine that. So the magazine, Opera Today, has praised Opera Theater's legacy of innovation, and they have said, and this is a quote, "If opera is to remain a viable, accessible 21st century art form, it will be largely owing to the commitment of visionary companies like Opera Theater of St. Louis." Thank you very much, Opera Today. Now, these innovating and visionary traditions are being continued this season with Wallace's Harvey Milk. OTSL, along with San Francisco's Opera Parallel, have commissioned a newly revised version of the opera, which has actually already premiered here at Opera Theater a few days ago. Let me see if I can get there we go. So Stuart Wallace was born in 1960, and he has an unconventional and highly theatrical body of work that's at once outrageous, intensely rhythmic, melodic, irreverent, funny, and emotionally compelling. Many of his operas deal with the mythic story of America and its politics. Besides opera, Wallace has composed for ballet as well as for various concert works, including a piece that I could not find video of, but I would love to see it. It's called Gorilla in a Cage, Concerto for Percussion and Orchestra. And it was specifically written for internationally renowned deaf percussionist Evelyn Glennie. Now, a lot of his operas have been very experimental in nature, from the dance-centered Kabbalah from 1989 to the surrealist Hopper's Wife from 1992. This is a chamber opera about an imagined marriage between the painter Edward Hopper and the gossip columnist Hedda Hopper, if you can imagine that. His most recent opera, The Bonesetter's Daughter from 2008, is based on Amy Tan's novel of the same name, and I believe Amy Tan was the librettist for that opera. Speaking of librettists, the librettist for Harvey Milk is Michael Corey, and this is actually their 4th collaboration. And it's the second time that Corey has worked at Opera Theater, the first being the libretto that he wrote for Ricky Ian Gordon's work for opera theater, The Grapes of Wrath, which was another opera theater commission. Corey is also well known as a lyricist for musical theater with titles such as Grey Gardens among his credits. The original Harvey Milk production, which they both were partners in, was commissioned in 1995. That's more than 25 years ago. It was a collaboration between Grand Opera Houston, New York City Opera, and the San Francisco Opera. This newly revised version commissioned here for opera theater is it's being staged by James Robinson, Opera Theater's artistic director, and an exciting young conductor, Carolyn Kwan, who will lead members of the St. Louis Symphony. And here they are, Robinson and Kwan. Now, this new version is very condensed and tightened, and it's significantly more compact and compelling than the original 95 version. The 1996 San Francisco production, under the direction of Donald Runnicles, had already been significantly reworked from the original 95 Houston premiere, and the San Francisco production became the definitive production until now. Now, let me explain just a little bit. This is a new opera. It's revised based on their original opera, but because it's been significantly revised, it was hard to find, well, we couldn't find any video for the current production. And the video that was available for even the 95 or 96 productions was very difficult to find. But here is just a very brief excerpt from the opening scene of the 1996 San Francisco production. So you can see, very rhythmic, very dramatic, very hard driving music. So who was Harvey Milk and why is he an important figure? Well, Harvey Milk was a young gay man from Woodmere, New York. He was born in 1930 to Lithuanian Jewish parents. As a young man who struggled with his identity, the post-World War II environment and the Holocaust informed his political positions and his ethnic identity. He began in his teens, in high school, in the 40s, to own his Jewishness. But at that time, he was not yet comfortable with his identity as a homosexual, and so he remained closeted, serving in the Navy and then becoming a New York stock analyst and so forth. Gradually, his identity began to emerge in the 60s and the 70s as he became more politically active. Now, the Stonewall Riots in 1969 had a profound impact on him. These riots were a series of spontaneous demonstrations by members of the gay community at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village. This particular moment in time, the Stonewall Riots, is often seen as actually the genesis, the beginning of the entire gay rights movement. And this moment became transformative in Harvey's life. So we're going to hear an excerpt from the early production from the scene of the Stonewall Riots. And we will hear in this excerpt from the opera what sounds in the beginning like glass shattering, evoking Kristallnacht, or the November pogrom, which is currently the more accepted name for it. And of course, that is the event that initiated the Jewish persecution by the Nazis. And it also indicates the beginning of Milk's nascent Jewish identity. The excerpt then depicts scenes of chaos at the Stonewall event, with clashing of chanting rioters and police shouting orders, and all of it is to very dramatic and percussive music. So as you can see, or as you can hear, that's very dramatic and very intense music. And again, it's an indication of the importance of that event in Milk's life. It was a transformative moment for him. Not too long after Stonewall, Milk ultimately embraced not only his Jewish identity, but also his homosexuality. And then in the early 70s, he moved with his romantic partner, Scott Smith, to San Francisco, which, as we know, was a much more open, tolerant, and hospitable place for gays. And this is where he also embraced the hippie culture. And what else? He grew a ponytail. So that was when he first moved to San Francisco. He opened a camera shop, Castro Camera, in the Castro neighborhood. That neighborhood had become a magnet for the gay community, and the store quickly became a neighborhood center. At this point, having become more politically active, Harvey decided to run for San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and he lost. After several more failed attempts at elective office, he remained undeterred. And he had, by this time, after several attempts, become a well-known and very respected community organizer in the Castro. He made a final attempt at running for office, this time adopting a more conventional persona in order to attract more mainstream voters. He traded his hippie ponytail for a traditional coat and tie. And in November of 1977, he finally wins his seat on the Board of Supervisors representing the Castro district, seated in 1978. And at the same time, making national and even international headlines by becoming one of the first openly gay elected officials in the United States. Now, Milk was an extremely popular and effective supervisor because his election had brought together a broad constituency with a progressive agenda. He was seen as a coalition builder. Excuse me. His agenda went far beyond LGBT rights. He fought for anti-discrimination legislation, established daycare centers for working mothers, the conversion of some military facilities to low-cost housing, reform of the tax code, and so much more. He was an eloquent spokesman for many marginalized communities. He spoke out about the infamous Proposition 6, which some of you may remember. It was an anti-gay ballot initiative, which was defeated in San Francisco, in California, while many similar attacks on gays were successfully waged around the country. Tragically, of course, in November of 1978, less than a year into his term, Milk was assassinated along with Mayor George Moscone. Supervisor Dan White, a disgruntled colleague of Milk's, was the assailant. White turned himself in, but he was acquitted of murder charges and convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter, due in part to what is often referred to as the Twinkie defense, having eaten too much junk food beforehand. And White ultimately served only 5 of the 8-year sentence that he was given. And sadly, 2 years after his release, he committed suicide. Harvey Milk was a visionary and a larger-than-life figure whose life has inspired many accounts, including books, documentaries, an Oscar-winning film. He's been honored with namings of statues and buildings, and I just found this an interesting little tidbit. In 2014, he became the first openly gay person to be featured on a US postage stamp. So now that that brings us to the opera itself. As Wallace and Corey began working on the revision of the '95 version of their opera, it became very clear to them that they needed to focus on the notion of Harvey Milk as a modern day mythic hero, much like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and others, who, while fighting for social justice, died untimely deaths, or who, like Moses, were denied the opportunity to taste the justice that he had worked so hard for. They recognized that Milk's life was deeply momentous and historic, and that with his life having ended so early and tragically. He had instantly passed over the realm into the land of martyrs and heroes and into another realm of legend and myth. So recognizing that opera itself is not a journalistic medium that thrives on factual detail, but rather an art form that demands larger than life characters and telescoped events, they saw the parallels in Milk's trajectory. And so their portrait of Milk is unapologetically mythic. It focuses on the concept of Milk as an ordinary man doing extraordinary things. The original 3-act, 3-hour opera has been condensed to a 2-act, 2-hour version. In the process of condensing the opera and rearranging some of the scenes, they have heightened the drama, making it much more dramatic and compelling. Wallace himself has actually described some of the newly revised passages, saying it is tauter, more visceral, and very direct. It is now streamlined. Here are some of the primary characters from the opera and who is portraying them in this production. Milk, portrayed by baritone Thomas Glass, is of course the primary character. Then we have Mayor George Moscone, sung by bass Nathan Stark, supervisor Dan White, sung by tenor Alex Schrader. These are the 3 primary characters, and each one has his own story to tell. While Milk, who is Jewish and gay, is the essential focus of the opera, the significance of Mayor George Moscone of Italian heritage and Dan White from an Irish background are clear, not only as major characters, but each represents a different ethnic group: Jews, gays, Italians, Irish, all members of the coalition of the disenfranchised that Milk ultimately brought together. Wallace and Corey also allowed the ethnic backgrounds of these primary characters to inform some of the musical motifs associated with them in the opera as a way to let the music help to communicate who these characters were and to help tell their stories. Other prominent characters in the story are Scott Smith, Milk's lover, sung by tenor Jonathan Johnson, his young campaign manager, Anne Cronenberg, mezzo-soprano Mac Holtz, and then there's Diane Feinstein, a name that I'm sure you all recognize, as sung by soprano Raquel Gonzalez, as the president of the Board of Supervisors. Now, while the opera generally follows the trajectory of Milk's life, there is an opening prologue scene, and this scene serves to set up Milk as a mythic figure by combining moments of celebratory shouts after his election, his mother's warning of golems and evil in the world, juxtaposed by a slow motion reenactment of Milk's assassination. And it is interspersed amid a recitation of the Jewish mourner's Kaddish. And the announcement, this is actually part of this prologue scene, by Board of Supervisors President Diane Feinstein of the assassination. These moments in the opera are dramatically punctuated by gunshots. Now I have here the actual footage. This is news footage of the Feinstein announcement. You'll see that it seems very jumbled. They can't seem to focus because everything was a mess and everyone was in total shock. But this is the actual footage from that moment.
As president of the board, as president of the Board of Supervisors, it's my duty to make this announcement. Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed. The suspect is Supervisor Dan White.
Pretty dramatic. So the opera then goes on after this prologue scene. And the scenes in Act 1 then go back to the beginning and retrace Milk's earlier life, beginning, interestingly, with Milk at an opera performance. This cleverly sets the stage for the mythic comparison of Milk's life to the mythic characters in many operas. And this was absolutely true. Milk loved opera, both from his early days and towards the end. And then we get a glimpse of Harvey's life as a closeted gay man in the 50s and 60s, and finally his owning of his Jewish identity after World War II. As he embraces that identity, he continues to question why he's unable to stand up for his gay identity. In one aria, he sings, "I stand up for myself as a Jew. Why not as a man who loves men?" The chorus inserts a response, and many of you will recognize it. It's a veiled prophecy couched in the words of one of the Yom Kippur Day of Atonement prayers. Who will live and who will die? Who by fire and who by flood? Who by sword and who by beast? Who by earthquake and who by plague? And who will live for the sake of others? And then, in reference to the Nazi persecution of both Jews and gays, Harvey reflects on his own dual identities and how they overlap, and the importance of memory, singing, "My star is a pair of triangles, one pink, one yellow. They overlap as I do. I'm one person. I'm just one person, but I have power. I remember who I am. I remember my name, my people, our histories. I remember. As if the idea of remembrance has empowered him, the opera then revisits events described earlier, when after the Stonewall Riots, Harvey finally openly embraces his homosexuality and moves to San Francisco's Castro neighborhood, symbolically growing his hair into a ponytail and embracing the counterculture and the hippie lifestyle. The first act ends then when, after losing several campaigns, his partner Scott urges him to cut his ponytail, to change his clothes, and to change his image. He has become a force to be reckoned with as a community organizer for the gay community and other groups who had no voice, and he's built a powerful power base. In the opera, it's as if the act of cutting off his ponytail becomes the symbolic moment of his moving forward into his mythic future. Now, there's another critical role in the opera is that of the messenger, who delivers these, he's kind of an unexplained figure, but he delivers these mystical, often prophetic messages. And it's near the end of the first act that the messenger prophetically tells him that he, like Moses, will lead his people to the promised land, but he will be unable to enter. He sings, "Look before you and see the place that was promised. I have let you see it with your own eyes, though you may not cross there." As Act 2 begins, there's a strong and violent scene. In the following video from the 95 version, and this is also in the current version, San Francisco's director, Donald Runnicles, describes common attitudes of of his times towards gays, and as we witness a very disturbing scene of gay bashers assaulting a gay couple, killing one of them. The music is very harsh and very percussive.
I sense also amongst some of our older patrons a feeling of resentment that a man who for them was a gay coming out, it was all very theatrical. This man has now been given well, not the ultimate privilege, but quite an honor to have an opera written about him. This is a story of what can happen in any city, in any time, really. A man who believes in this cause and is willing to fight for it, and who has had such a profound effect on other people's lives.
So it was incidents like these, like this gay bashing incident, that ultimately turned Harvey into an activist, not just for the gay community, but for all marginalized groups. Now here we see Harvey, now in a suit and tie, with short hair, of course, announcing unabashedly that he is gay and that he is once again running for office. Again, this is from the 1996 production. So again, very strong and rhythmic music. So the composer now finally formally introduces us to Dan White. White is an ex-cop, an ex-fireman, a Vietnam vet, and he is also running for supervisor in another district. He talks of his nostalgia for his old Irish neighborhood and wanting to preserve it or bring it back. Both Harvey and Dan win their races, along with a rainbow of diversity for the new Board of Supervisors, an Asian, a Latino, a Black, and others who are celebrated by Mayor Moscone, who in his aria, "Thank You, San Francisco," says, "This was my dream. This is America. Today, we've broken down the barriers. Today, we elect our neighborhoods, leaders who look like the real San Francisco." So after winning, Harvey, of course, made national and international headlines as the first openly gay man to win an office. And in interviews, he was actually asked if he would be representing only gays or all of the people. And again, this is actual news footage.
Francisco, does that mean, as many straights are concerned, well, maybe the gays are taking over San Francisco? Are you going to be a supervisor for all the people?
I have to be. That's what I was elected for. I have to be there to open up for the dialogue, for the sensitivities of all people and for all the problems. The problems that affect this city affect all of us.
So Harvey's platform from the very beginning was always about hope. He had gradually assumed a more and more significant political role in the Castro neighborhood, eventually having been dubbed the mayor of Castro Street. His message of hope was not just for the gays, but for all of the groups who felt that they had no voice: women, minorities, people with disabilities, and so forth. And although his message was most prominently directed towards the gay community, it was meant for anyone who had given up hope. He famously said, "You have to give them hope. Hope for a better world, hope for a better tomorrow, hope for a better place to come to if the pressures at home are too great. Hope that all will be all right." Without hope, not only the gays, but the Blacks, the seniors, the handicapped, the us's will give up. In this next excerpt from the Academy Award-winning 2008 movie Milk, we see Harvey delivering one of his most famous and iconic speeches, demanding that gays embrace their identities as he had and to come out, for it was only through coming out and being authentic about who they were that gays and other minorities would be able to enact the changes that they wanted to see.
Approach you. To preserve your democracy. Brothers and sisters, you must come out. Your friends, come out to your neighbors, come out to your fellow workers. Once and for all, let's break down the myths and destroy. For your sake, for their sake, for the sake of all the youngsters who have been scared by the votes from Dave to Eugene. On the Statue of Liberty, it says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free." In the Declaration of Independence, it is written, "All men are created equal." For Mr. Briggs and Mrs. Bryant and all the bigots out there, no matter how hard you try, you can never erase those words from the Declaration of Independence.
Dynamic. So after his election, Harvey began to wield even more power in City Hall through his very good relationship with Mayor Moscone, and to enjoy a number of political successes, such as defeating an anti-discrimination bill and passing a gay rights ordinance. All the while, Dan White was becoming more and more enraged, not only with his feelings about what Milk was suggesting, but also complaining that he couldn't support his family on the salary of a supervisor. In this aria of his, which begins very quietly with an ominous tone, he complains, "We have a baby, a new baby. What do you expect this kid to eat? What do I feed my kid and my family for Thanksgiving? Beans and Franks?" And he then resigns his position of supervisor in anger.
My reputation as a hard worker.
So actually, White, shortly thereafter, resigning, asks to be reinstated, and he is not successful. Like many operatic and mythic heroes, Harvey had a vision and prophetically imagined his own assassination. And he thinks about his mother, and he sings, "I was born too late, too soon, and I spoke too late. And I learned the way to survive was to lie. I'm sorry I lied, and I'm angry that you died before you could see the man that I became." He amplifies on his regret, singing, "The lies that we told our mothers turned to shame, and shame to rage, and rage to pride, and pride to hope, and hope will never be silent." He then records a statement, which he says is to be played in the event of my death by assassination. This recording is actually embedded in the opera. You'll hear Harvey's own words on what he is imagining. And at the end of this recording, he says the following: "If a bullet should enter my brain, let the bullet destroy every closet door." And at that point, a little premature there, at that point, Dan White enters his office with his gun drawn and kills him. This again is an excerpt from the movie.
No.
So the opera concludes then with a candlelight vigil, the recitation of the mourner's Kaddish, and with the messenger and Harvey appearing on a summit overlooking the mourners. It's not unlike Moses overlooking the promised land and not being allowed to enter, or Martin Luther King saying, "I've been to the mountaintop." The messenger says, "In every generation are those just few who stand for the sake of others, who follow the path of the sun to its end and come to the mountaintop singing." He then reiterates, "Look before you and see the place that was promised. I've let you see it with your own eyes, though you may not cross." After the shocking news of the assassination spread, that evening, a crowd of tens of thousands spontaneously came together on Castro Street in a silent candlelight vigil, marching all the way to City Hall. It is still today recognized as one of the most eloquent responses to violence that a community has ever expressed. The following video is actual footage from the march, and the voices that you'll hear are those of his young campaign manager, Ann Cronenberg, and Jim Ellicott, a member of the Teamsters Union, who was initially an opponent of Milk's, but who subsequently became one of Harvey's most ardent supporters.
thousands and thousands of people. And that feeling of such loss, having lost someone who was so important and something, Harvey stood for something more than just him.
Of Harvey killed, and a combination of going down with all those people. I don't know if you call it expressing your grief or what it was, but being with all those people, and it's nighttime in San Francisco and a bunch of strangers around you, and you feel as safe as if you're doing your own home.
So Harvey Milk's legacy is monumental, and it's had a profound impact in the Castro neighborhood and all over the country. Gay pride parades and crosswalks unabashedly show their colors. The arc of the gay movement is reflected in Harvey's life. It is in myth the ancients knew that the greatest of human truths can be fathomed. And of such stuff are operas made. And such is the story of Harvey Milk and the legacy he leaves.
There's hope for a better world. There's hope for a better tomorrow. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you've got to give them hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you.
Does anyone have any questions for Kathleen?
I will urge you, if you have the opportunity, there are several more performances through June 25th, and I've seen the production. It is powerful, very compelling.
Kathleen, that was a very powerful presentation, and Harvey Milk's story is obviously one we should never forget, and authors like this help us remember. And thank you for helping us do this.
Absolutely. Thanks for allowing me to present it.
There's a note here with Kathleen that was excellent. Thank you so much. That was on the chat comment.
Thank you, Shirley.
So it was really beautiful. Wonderful tribute.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then we will conclude today. Thank you again, Kathleen. It was a wonderful presentation, and we appreciate you taking the time to spend the afternoon with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.